in death metal, the solos are rarely the focal point, despite the large number of creative and competent players. You know, there generally is a tendency to use those kind of Slayer-esque noise bursts, where, there's a lot of whammy bar abuse, and, it just makes the song feel heavier, brutal, bestial, primal, doesn't really add anything musically, apart from, certain aesthetic decorations, right? Well, outside of a few very distinct cases where it does enrich the song, I'm generally thinking about Sepultura's Morbid Visions, where it works perfectly. But I think that, this was done as a way, to counter the previous generation's obsession with those cheesy pentatonic blues solos that always came, after the second chorus in every song, and just didn't really add much. And then, there was a riff underneath that felt very basic, just a kind of single note, chugging, with one or two power chords thrown ahead. Because I think, a lot of guys wanted to be Michael Denno or Dave Murray. They just didn't quite have the level necessary to pull that off. But yeah, anyways, death metal really did move away more and more, and, for best, for really good reason, from those kind of rock and roll ideas. So here's a list of, 5 noteworthy death metal solos. This is not a top 5 list, or these are the 5 best solos. No, these are just 5 good solos in fantastic songs, and really solos that elevate those songs, because that's what a good solo is, right? There are a lot of instances, of fantastic shredders joining in some bands that, that have like the kind of very basic 3 power chord songs, and then you get a lot of, wannabe Malmsteen playing on top, but that doesn't really make a good song. So anyway, let's get started. So that was Fermented, Offal, Discharge by Necrophagist, or Necrophagist, or whatever the hell you want to call them. So here, the song lets up briefly from that, technical death metal density to allow a really sparse set of chords to give the solo complete freedom. It's nothing magical, very kind of a simple, minor scale progression. But what Mohammed Swishmez does with that, that's what really becomes interesting, because he uses these little melodies and very soulful bends that are done tastefully, and then he slowly but surely modifies them into faster and more complex licks. But it works because we've already heard those melodies in their simplest form, and he's just adding onto them, so the listener is not lost. There are a lot of repeating, recognizable melodies that anchor the solo and stop it from devolving into note vomit. The first riff change raises the intensity, goes back into full-on tech death, and this is where the solo introduces the defining melody in its fullest form. That's the absolute apex of this song. It's that one lick. It comes in very quickly, but once you hear it, it is, because it's some of the notes are harmonized, but never quite entirely, and he only really does that to enhance the melodies. That kind of break up those sweeps. Once the song returns into full tech death mode, like this time it goes absolutely insane. Muhammad allows himself to go at breakneck speed before playing the defining melody one final time, because if you have something good, you can't just play it once. And, you know, and ending on a repeating lick that gracefully makes a way for the final section that ends the song, you know, the kind of final vocal section. But yeah, fantastic solo by a guy who's very difficult to emulate. So yeah, so this is Cynic, so how could I, that concludes the album very well. So here, you know, Paul Masvidal starts off with playing the acoustic intro, but this time on the electric guitar, you know, as Jason Goebel, you know, starts off with some long arpeggios, reminiscent of many neoclassical guitarists. But, you know, he's not looking to shred here, he's really, you know, looking to add soul and feeling, and, you know, we really went into this pretty quite in depth. You can find the Hessian Scrum podcast with you know, Jason Goebel and Santiago Dobles, where we really go into that. But anyway, so, you know, this creates this kind of beautiful polyharmony, you know, where both guitarists are doing something quite different, but it all adds together, you know, to form this kind of very beautiful and well thought out, you know, kind of like overarching melody. But, you know, Jason Goebel's always doing these slight shifts, you know, he's never quite repeating the same lick twice, but it's always these you know, modifications of that lick, and it keeps progressing, keeps evolving, you know, keeps getting more and more complex, but it's still the idea of playing, you know, melodies, you know, each one of them could be a riff. That's the kind of basic idea. Yeah. And then, you know, when Masvidal, you know, kind of forces that kind of a riff change, and he really allows those kind of jazzy chords to come through, and there's a lot of very rich harmony that you don't really get to see in death metal, because, you know, a lot of the time, you know, you're not really going to be adding more than 2 or 3 notes at any given moment, because, you know, because the way distortion works and how it kind of tends to compress all these different sounds, and it makes it very hard to distinguish full chords. But here, he really takes that liberty, and he seems to do it really well, because, you know, we can kind of distinguish those chords. And then, you know, Goebel still keeps within that kind of same, you know, methodology of, you know, having all these licks are constantly evolving, but he does it to fit within those very tight parameters that Masvidal set, you know, which is, you know, the opposite of what tends to go on in a lot of heavy metal solos, you know, where you just have that kind of 1 note and 2 power chords. You know, here, it's a very dense riff, and, you know, Goebel is kind of beautifully navigating, you know, within that very tight space, and he's doing it so well. So, you know, eventually the lead guitar shifts into a synth guitar, and, you know, and this isn't, you know, due to any lack of technical skill or whatever, because, you know, you can see the live videos where Goebel, you know, he still plays the synth guitar part on his guitar, and it just sounds just as great. So I think, you know, this was probably more to kind of give the, you know, the song a sensation of finality, and it is the last song on the album. And it fits the kind of changing mood as the song, you know, slowly and, you know, it goes out very slowly. You know, there's that tempo change. And, you know, it's just, you know, here he's not trying to wow the listener. You know, it's just a solo that kind of reflects that very kind of, you know, conclusive, you know, feeling that I believe, you know, the band are really trying to evoke on the song. And the excellent guitar solo just kind of enhances that and makes you want to listen to the album from the start again. So yeah, another fantastic solo. was just the solo from Cryptopsy, Slit Your Guts, which I'm sure everyone who's watching this knows this song. If not, just pause this video and go listen to that album immediately. So, the song constantly crushes the listener with a variety of very fast tremolo-picked riffs. But somehow, 2/3 in, it condenses all that tension into a mesmerizing solo. The contrast between all the complicated and rapidly modulating riffs, and this relatively simple kind of tremolo-picked pattern, that we've heard quite a few times, before at this point. But it just works so well. The fact that it's a simple riff, it counters everything. Because, everything in this song is so dissonant, so chromatic. It's memorable, definitely. There is melody, but it's not consonant melody. And here, just having that consonant melody, it's once again, it's not quite a science, but, you need to have that kind of tastefulness to know where can I put and what kind of simple melody can I put within a very fast and crushing death metal song. And this is what, Cryptopsy does really well on this album. And especially this song, which is probably why it's the most popular song of the album. But the underlying riff, it obeys the harmonic minor scale, which is, a classic scale in death metal, black metal, whatever you want. And the way the band do it really well is that they end on the last note of the scale, which calls back for the first note of the scale, which is the first note of this riff. So that allows the song, to always be resolved when it starts again. It creates this fantastic loop. Very basic technique, but it's always so efficient, And, so the solo, it sticks really closely to the riff at first. And, it starts out very melodic. Before, you have some Kerry King-like bursts, very short, but they're only introduced, to help the kind of solo find its way back into stability. And then, eventually introducing those riffs again. It's that contrast between consonant and dissonant, chaos and order, which really allows this song to shine through. But yeah, it's a great solo, and this is probably the one of the solos in death metal that I believe really relies on that context to really work, and it does so well. That was Death's Flattening of Emotions. I think for most people, no matter your age, Chuck Schuldiner soloing style is always the kind of introduction to what death metal solos can be. And here on, Human, he has Paul Masvidal from Cynic, another, very incredible and gifted player. And, they create this kind of two-sided solo, as both are in many ways opposites of each other, So here, the song takes a much more heavy metal-esque stance, in allowing, kind of a basic repeating riff underneath, that provides a very loose bass. There isn't much melodic content within that riff, so both of them have, the most freedom that they can, muster to play their solos. And, one thing I love about Chuck is, his lead playing is so idiosyncratic. It's him. It's not very, very hard to do. Because he has gone on to say a million times that he does not know any music theory, but he has this little combination of natural minor and harmonic minor, maybe some little forays in something a bit more exotic like the melodic minor. But the way he does it, this is where I believe he doesn't know any theory, is that he's got his kind of scale runs that he goes up and down through. And, I'm not saying he's sloppy, but he's not really counting the number of, the actual number of notes. I think, his entire ideology is how many notes can I fit into this bar, when he's going super fast, when he's repeating those kind of licks. He's trying to do it as many times as possible within that bar, And that's what makes it good. You get that kind of, sloppiness but tight that, John Nottvile as well uses very much, where you have that, free kind of passage, you can play however you want, but once the bar is over, the bar is over. So it kind of reins in that insanity, and it sounds really good when it's a very good musician doing it. So you see, the thing I like about Chuck, his runs are very obvious. You know what notes they're going to land on. He doesn't really evolve over the years, but the way he does it is he's got a very good feeling for knowing when to go up and when to go down. It's those sudden changes. It's the ability not to just follow blindly the kind of, where the notes are, but to kind of go up, change direction and to keep things interesting. And, what really makes his strength as a soloist is those little melodies he uses between the kind of scale runs, that work more as punctuation between those fantastic melodies. And when he slows down, you really see, you get to see how exotic and how oriental a lot of his melodies are. And his solo culminates on a harmony that is related to the song's chorus, albeit somewhat distantly, but it's the same kind of melodic idea. And here he harmonizes it, and he's giving it new context, by going through all those runs, those melodies, and just really stands out in this song. And then he has a final little run that very briefly coincides, with Masvidal starting. As I said before, Masvidal is very different to Chuck. He's disciplined, incredibly tight. You can tell he's a trained guitarist. He has a very good understanding of harmony, of chords, or whatever you want. And here, what I love, what he does so well, probably even better than he does in Cynic at times, is the inclusion of those jazz ideas into metal situations, right? So those ambiguous, unresolved melodies that glide continuously, because there's such fantastic phrasing, it's fluid, but it's not the same kind of 16th note run. There is variety, but it's not choppy. It flows well, with all those, against the rhythm, and he does it so well. And there's a lot going on in Masvidal's solo. A lot more than what Chuck is doing from the theory perspective. A lot of whole tone scale runs, I think some chromatic, but he's always changing it so it fits with the solo. But what he really does ultimately is he creates this kind of enigmatic and unresolved solo that comes after Chuck's, emotional, explicit solo, and both do very well to create this tale of two halves. Alright, that was another huge classic solo from the ever so talented Bob Vigna. Immolation's classic Nailed to Gold from Hereinafter. Fantastic band with a long discography, but I don't know, this album always has some very interesting melodies each time you listen to it. So anyway, the solo appears pretty much out of nowhere, and it creates its own narrative within the song's narrative, because Immolations has always been a very narrative band in terms of composition. There's a lot of repetition, but it's always in unexpected and very kind of logical ways, that flow with the lyrics, from A to Z. So, here it starts off, with Vigna's idiosyncratic take on Trey Azagtot's chaotic style, which is quite well because, he knew that he couldn't quite copy Azagtot, so he did something very different with it. And I think that's why, Immolation were capable of having such a long and successful career, because of how, unique Bob Vigna is compared to his peers. But, compared to Trey Azagtot, you could say he's much less reliant on the tremolo and the Van Halen school of techniques. But, he's just very good at, using a lot of kind of weird legato and some clever kind of, somewhat out of tune bends, quarter bends, 3/4 bends, to create his own take on that style. So, he starts off very slowly with that kind of stuff, and then, from there he builds up the tension with some bends and, finally some sparse little melodies that, continuously accelerate without any resolution. And this is where, the patience has to come in, to be able to do that. And then eventually, we get the payoff as the song lands on its main riff. And then, the guitar is briefly doubled, very briefly, to accentuate the song's defining melody once again. This is what really pushes the solo to the next level, because you have that one solo that is above the noise level of all the other solos, because it is doubled. And you get that fantastic melody, which is, quite a few songs here. It is the apex of the song. It is the best part. This is why we wait to listen to this song. Bob Viney kind of reminds me in a lot of ways of John McLaughlin at his best. With Mahavishnu. Especially on Birds of Fire. The way he just kind of knows how to go between being very melodic and how to control that cathartic chaos, and to make something really, enjoyable for the listener out of it. And, as the solo ends, it ends just perfectly, because, Ross Dolan comes back with his little catchy vocal melodies. And I love the way how the solo really takes its time navigating the riff maze. And, it just culminates, perfectly on one of Immolation's best riffs. And, just further elevates it.